Ladies and gentlemen, they are here, and I've been hearing about this film, the idea of it, the fact that it happened from my good friend John Donvan, and I'm very happy to have both you and Caren, your co-director, joining me. Congratulations. It is so exciting, and I'm so excited for you. John, how are you feeling that it's going up on PBS and the world gets to see this amazing film that partners with your even more, can I say, amazing book, just because it's longer and took so forever?
Yeah, well, the book did take forever, and then the movie took forever. So it feels like the end of a marathon, but it turns out to have been a marathon that was really, really worth running because getting the PBS audience is really dream come true stuff for us.
Caren, congratulations. You have always been behind the scenes, producing people that look like John and doing a great job at making them look even better than they already look. And then now you step out in front of the camera and even more vulnerably with your son, Mickey, who the viewer, I think, falls in love with him. Is a handsome man, falls in love with you and your relationship with him. How are you feeling about putting this out there? Congratulations. So important.
Thank you. I'm very excited. I'm also, pretty apprehensive, but that's okay because that's why we did the movie, was to get it out there. So the time is now to get excited.
Why did you allow yourself and your son, your family, to have the spotlight put on you, drawing attention to yourself? You obviously know how important this issue is, and I'm so glad that you did it, and I can tell you all the reasons why. But why did you decide to allow Mickey to be like such a focus and a star?
Well, for about 2 years, we weren't going to do that. And we actually started the film. We thought it was just going to be about Donald. And as we kind of expanded to make it more contemporary, for about 2 years, Donvan was
Yeah.
was that guy over there, very persuasive that the best way to tell the story, because he's a great storyteller, would be to have Mickey and I in the film. To weave it together and to tell our story, because if you meet one person with autism, you meet one person, and Mickey's one of them. And so that's what we did. But it took a while for me to kind of get on board. And as long as, I wanted Mickey to be okay with it. And he was. And he's excited. He calls it "My Movie's Coming Out." So.
Well, he's a star. And I just wanted to take just a moment to say, John, great job convincing Caren. And Caren, you putting your son and yourself out there and us getting to see your relationship. I'm entertained by and interested in eavesdropping on, any parent and their child at a park. But the way, it's always fascinating, but the way to see your love for him and to see his personality and to share all of that was so impactful to me. I laughed and I cried. And can I tell you when I laughed? And I almost wonder if this is inappropriate, because it's not intentionally being funny per se, but when he's uncomfortable about having to wear a graduation robe, and he basically says the robe is stupid, the hat is stupid. And I have been saying that myself for my whole life. I think that's a stupid, whole thing is stupid, and I hate it. And he literally gave one of my thoughts that I wanted to put in my comedy routine, like a voice, and I loved it. And it was real and authentic and so human. And I just wanted to tell you, thank you for that. And thank you for introducing us to him, because it's so impactful.
Thank you. That's actually the one scene that Mickey and I are not thrilled with. Mickey especially, because he sees himself as not ideal setting. And, when I tell Mickey the way to get over it is to throw his hat up in the air, which is really stupid. And, but it was a moment that a lot of people can relate to.
Well,
and there's, Mickey says a lot of things that people want to say, and they don't.
Yes.
He does not have a ton of filters.
Yes, and that's true of a lot of other folks that we get introduced to, and not all, but the kind of lack of an understanding of social norms. And I think that's a really important thing for people to understand, so that when they're out there in the world, they can react appropriately. And you talk a lot about that as well. Can we talk about labels and language, John Donvan.
Yeah.
How hard is it, both in, of course, the book and in the documentary, to have a conversation about autism when it's such a wide range? And we use this word spectrum. At one point, someone pushed back against some of the labeling, which I thought was interesting that you included that. So talk to me about language and how folks in the community understand it so we can better understand it.
I think I would start this by saying that the definition of autism is an area for argument in itself. It was only crystallized as a concept about 80 years ago. In the case of Donald Triplett, who's in our film, he was the first case really described fully. There were other people with autism forever, of course, and there were other people like looking at individuals like Donald around that time who were kind of focusing on, is this, what do we call these behaviors? But Donald was the case one in the article that like really, really spelled it out for the first time and became the seminal article. But since then, the definition of autism changed many, many times and came to include a much, much broader range of people. So that today you'll have somebody who has the diagnosis of autism, who is a college professor who's publishing books and driving to work and having a family, but still has real challenges just talking with people and understanding jokes, and sometimes missteps because of that. And that person is labeled autistic, diagnosed autistic. But then you have somebody like my brother-in-law, who I don't mention this in the film. I do very briefly mention it in the film, that I have a brother-in-law with autism who lives in Israel, and he has almost no language and ability to speak. He needs 24-hour care, even for things like being able to eat a meal, put together a meal. He needs help with absolutely everything, and he has the diagnosis of autism. So that's why it's called a spectrum. This concept of the spectrum only kind of came into focus in the 80s and the 90s. And it includes a lot of people with a lot of different presentations of challenges and very, very different needs. And so it becomes really, really politicized because there's issues of who gets to speak for people with autism,
Right.
who gets the resources that the government can provide for people with autism. And one really specific thing that a change that's we've seen since we started our work is that it was kind of considered polite and respectful 20 years ago to describe somebody who's on the spectrum as a person with autism. It was called people first language. It's as though, it was the opposite of saying, here's a disabled person. No, it's a person with a disability. The disability doesn't define the person. But there's been a change in that position, and it's much argued over that no, the person is inseparable from their autism. They are autistic. You wouldn't, the argument is made, you wouldn't say a person with black. You would say a black person. And so that itself has become an argument, which we kind of bridge in the film by using both terms, and also using the term on the spectrum. So to your question of labeling is important, it's really, really critical in this conversation. And it is not, in my view, it's not settled. People people, as in most things polarized, there are people who will say, yes, it is settled. It's settled my way.
Right.
But I take the position that it's not really settled.
Caren, what would you add to that about language and how you talk about it, or how Mickey himself talks about it?
Well, to add to what John said first, until recently, until a handful of years ago, there was a division. There was autism, and then there was Asperger's. There was
Right.
sort of like a line in the sand. And I think that was a clarity that really helped people on the spectrum, and especially on the more profound end of the spectrum, because it said that we're different. We have the same thing, but it's not exactly the same. And that makes you look at it differently, and that there are different needs and requirements and supports for different types of people. When Mickey was, for an example, when Mickey was first diagnosed, you would have thought of him as someone who was on the very high end of the autism spectrum, because he had language and because he was semi-independent. But the spectrum that now includes everybody sort of puts him in the middle, because he is someone who's going to need support for the rest of his life.
Right.
So he's it's almost like the categories move. It doesn't change him at all, but it does, I think, make it cloudy for the world to understand it.
Yes, certainly. And that's why I'm asking about
Mhm.
it. I learned so much watching this documentary. I'm so excited for viewers, for listeners to watch it. The Wynton Marsalis, how the hell did you get that guy? He's the greatest. Is he like the most famous, respected jazz composer, I guess,
Right.
of American composer of like our time, and he does the music. And I don't know anything about music, but I do know that music in this documentary mattered, and this music made this documentary, this film, that much better. And I don't even notice music, but I just loved it. So congrats on
Yeah.
that. I don't know what there
It,
is to say.
it's really unusual for there to be a documentary that has a jazz score and not be about jazz.
Is that right?
And so we did a documentary about autism, and it has a jazz score thanks to Wynton Marsalis, who, to answer your question, Caren Zucker is a bulldog when it comes to let's try it. And we knew that Wynton has a brother with autism, um,
Ah.
and that he in the past has been something of a supporter, and he has been a real supporter of the activist of autistic people in the community.
Mhm.
And Caren and I were talking, oh, wouldn't it be great to ask Wynton Marsalis? Well, that'll never happen. But Caren doesn't believe in anything will never
Well, I
happen.
think it's awesome that I think it's important that this film and your book are so important for the entire, more for people who don't know
Yeah.
someone who is autistic or anywhere on the spectrum. It's far more important for the rest of us to read and learn about, as is the film. But those who are directly affected by it, say on a daily basis, or that are living in this world, you would think that they would all want to contribute however they can to this masterful documentary that you've done about autism, which covers, you probably could have done 10 hours. The book is so well researched, and you spent years on that, writing it. And obviously, Caren, you've both been living with someone with autism. Did I just say it wrong? Or an autistic person. And it's really, really, you would think everybody would want to contribute. And so it's great that so many people have. Let me ask you, though, let me tell you about when I cried. I cried, and I've heard about this a lot, when you see actual video of an autistic, I guess I want to say teenager, maybe early 20s, who is getting beat up by police officers and sprayed in the face with mace. Nick Pletnikoff, I believe is his name. And it was heartbreaking, and watching his mom's response. Tell me about this issue, because I thought it was one of the most important segments of the book as well, training law enforcement officers to understand, which is why we talk a lot about why they need this education and these resources. Tell me about this issue, and maybe Nick, Caren.
Well, there's the big picture too, which is what you mentioned a minute ago, which is we did the film for people outside of the autism community. It's a great film to have for my community, but we wanted to reach people outside. We wanted to reach the police. We wanted to reach the medical community. We wanted to reach businesses. We want them to see this, to have, a deeper understanding. And the police, we're very confident that when the police get training and the police have a better understanding, and we've seen that happen, about people with autism, and learn about them. And it's a two-way street. It's not just the police, it's also people with autism. If you're a parent and your child, whether they're young child or an adult child, is out in the world, you have to also give them tools so that they know to say, I have autism. It goes both ways. And we really want this film to be used, and it has been already, for first responders to see and get a deeper understanding. I mean,
I just thought of a question, which might be all kinds of violation of privacy, but like if you have someone in your family that you're taking care of with autism, and they tend to just wander off, and maybe, as this kid does, he would look in cars and be, quote, suspicious. Is there a policy or a movement to like let local law enforcement that there's a person out here
yes,
in
there
this
is. There are in the more progressive towns and cities have registration offices where you can. My son, when he lived home, is registered as somebody who has autism, so that if a policeman ever were to see him,
And he wears a bracelet also, doesn't he? That he says to show to the officer.
well, that's more of a kind of Caren Zucker trick, where not the registering with your police office or community is really, really critical if your child or young adult person with autism, because if the police have it on file, it makes a huge difference. I felt, since Mickey was young and he was out there on his own, that the medical alert bracelets that police who don't know about autism, and if Mickey was ever somewhere on his own and something happened, just having a medical alert bracelet and underneath it says autism, it gives you some kind of clue that there's something up. And so I've just always felt more secure having him have that. And he'll waive it.
By the way, I also love that you feature your other two kids, Mickey's siblings, and we get to see them just being with and interacting with Mickey. And each one of those normal human moments that you included were just so wonderful and humanizing and interesting and entertaining. And I think it's important also to show how family members relate and deal with parents, obviously, but siblings too. I don't really have a question. I just wanted to say I think that was nice. And if there's anything to say about it, then go ahead, guys.
I think we would just say that autism is a family affair. Almost all the time, and that we completely believe in centering autistic people, but right over their shoulders are almost always parents and then siblings. And there's also always, it's a generational challenge too, is the question of what happens when the parents aren't there anymore. Where's the support going to come from?
Right.
And some families do kind of like can turn to the siblings and say, Joe, you're going to have to help Joe later when I'm gone. And some families don't want to tell the sibling that that's going to be their life. And so what we're trying to say in the film is that either way, we want to prepare larger communities to be the ones who are there in all the little ways on a day-to-day basis to recognize that a person has challenges, to be okay with those challenges, to step up and help with those challenges. Very often people say to us when we do screenings, we've been to like 23 states with the movie so far since March, and showing it to small groups. When there are people who don't know about autism, they raise their hand and say, so what can we do? What can we do? And a really great answer came from another person who was in our film. Amy Lutz was at one of these screenings, and she just said, just don't stand back and look oddly at a mother and child when the child is having a meltdown. When you're in a supermarket, she said, and the child knocks over the whole stack of Ritz crackers, don't stand back in shock. Say to the mom, hey, I got this. I'll take care of the crackers. You take care of the kid.
Yeah.
Or at the checkout counter, she said, get in front of me in the line. You jump ahead. Little stuff like that. Instead of, I think very often and Caren, you can speak to this more, that parents will get dirty looks about a kid misbehaving. What's wrong with that parent? Why can't they control that kid? Get them out of here if they're in a restaurant or in a movie theater, something like that. And what we're trying to say with the film is that in all of these tiny little interactions, everybody who's not autistic has a role to play by filling those gaps. And so I started with the sibling question, but I'm going to the idea that the community goes beyond the family and goes beyond the siblings and goes beyond the parents, to the neighbors, to the people in the workplace, to the passengers on a bus, to the patrons in a movie theater, to the people at a baseball game who are going to encounter people who are on the spectrum.
You're talking about when Amy's answer to that person at the screening, and she's great. Amy Lutz and her son is fascinating. And they show, I don't know if you want to call it an episode, but he's getting it's her son, right? He's getting his hair.
Yeah.
And he's like lying down in the hair salon. And there's this wonderful little moment in your film where you just capture the mom's like, sorry about that. And the woman says, you never need to apologize. And it's
lying down on the floor in the middle of the hair salon.
Lying down in the middle of a hair salon.
Yeah. But, Amy said that kind of stuff is getting much, much better today.
That's great. That's great to hear. But like, that's the kind of thing that a parent or someone can say at a screening or at a talk or in a film this way, but that's a cultural shift that they're asking for. And John, you mentioned support, and Caren, I'm sure you grapple with this, you and your husband and your family, what happens when I'm gone? What do you tell your son? But I think the key issue here is support from the beginning, which is not a cultural shift, which is a policy shift. So what are the resources? What is the support in a community, in a state, in a country to allow families, and you get to this in the film, who have little to no resources, single parents, and so on. That's, I think, that a policy shift where
and it's really, really challenging. And that's where, we've gotten to a place in society where we're responding to kids and we're educating them, and
which didn't used to be true.
Right. Well, what's their value to society? Why should my taxpayer dollars go to supporting an education for someone who's not going to contribute to society, is what my narrow-minded, but a lot of people probably.
Legally now, you have to do that. You didn't have to do that before. But legally now, once you hit 21, we don't have the same support. We spend all this money as a society and put all this effort into helping to teach and educate and make, community members of people who are on the spectrum. And then when they turn 21, we say, good luck, hope it goes well.
You do a great job to also, I mean, there's, like we said, I'm sure there's so much more that you wanted to do, and maybe you'll make another film, and so much of it's in the book, and you can add to it every day because of people's real lives and real moments that are happening. But you take a look at the issue, of course, of resources and socioeconomics, but also of race. You feature a woman named Dr. Stephanie Parks, who is really brilliant, PhD, who's a Black woman, married to a Black man, Black son, who is really wonderful. I wanted to see more of his life and behavior and so on. But talk to me about why you featured her and this issue of how it's looked at as in terms of, it was super racist at one point. I mean, still is, I'm sure.
Well, what was racist, and not in the white hood kind of racism, but more the sort of ingrown systemic racism of attitudes unconsciously. In the 50s and the 60s, there was a belief on the part of psychiatry, I mean the institution of psychiatry, to the degree that it knew anything about autism. There was a belief that the children who were autistic came from families of highly, highly educated and highly successful individuals. And that's partly because the people who had access to a psychiatrist in the 50s and 60s were generally professional people, people who had had a lot of education and who were going to go see a psychiatrist with their child, whereas that really wasn't that common a thing in the 50s and 60s. And so successful people who had PhDs and MDs and other kinds of degrees and high-level executive jobs in the 50s and 60s were white people. And so it literally was kind of, the leap was made literally that, autistic children are only born to families where the parents are really, really highly educated and highly, highly intelligent.
I was astonished. That was what I was most shocked to learn in your film.
So who did that rule out in the 50s and 60s? It ruled out children of color from having the diagnosis because they didn't have the right kind of parents, was the belief. And it was completely undeliberate and unconscious, but it had an impact that people, children of color who were autistic couldn't get that diagnosis. They were diagnosed with all kinds of other things. Sometimes it was blamed on bad parenting or emotional issues or broadly insanity. And so that
still is, right?
Yeah,
sorry?
That's what I was going to say. I mean, we've come a long way, but not nearly far enough, and the numbers still show you that.
It still lingers.
And we're, that was something that when we were reporting and producing the film, that we really thought was important to get in there, that race and people of color and people of lower socioeconomic means, really have a different life that's a lot more challenging, and that society they really need to get it. And in order for there to be a more level playing field for everyone.
You guys feature
just when I say level playing field, I mean just to have a fulfilling life. It's really basic stuff.
Yeah. whatever that means to different people is different, but it's not that complex to a lot of people. And of course, it's expensive. So, I mean, it comes down to resources, and you look at so many different families, including your own, who have advocated for people for their entire lives. And it's still really, really hard for folks to get access to resources, to be, as you talked about earlier, classified. You introduce us to so many different people in this film. And, the original, the OG, is Donald Triplett, and he's now in his 90s. And here's the thing, the whole town comes around him. It's a beautiful story about him and the way that town treats him, the way that the people at the bank treat him. But we find out, it's because his parents owned the bank. And then, he's got the best possible shot at being this man of the people that he is. And we can talk about where he is on the spectrum and how he functions. But they can't, everybody supported him because his family had kind of the most resources. For goodness sake, they owned the bank. That's not true of most people. And you introduce us to so many of those people, and we become intimate with them and their families. I'm forgetting the gentleman, the single dad and his son, which I followed him on Twitter now because he tweets
Jason
about
and Seamus.
Who is it?
Jason and Seamus.
Jason and his son Seamus is a wonderful story. What would you say about them? They also feel pretty excited about being included in the film, I could tell.
Yeah, I mean, Jason is. It was interesting. He was really, really resistant to us coming and filming, even in communicating. And I said before, Caren is a bulldog. She's the one who wrote the email to Wynton Marsalis that persuaded him. So she kept. I
want to add one thing to that, which is that Wynton Marsalis is a class act guy, and he's what I would call a mensch. So it wasn't just me; it was, and John also should take some credit. But that's the kind of human being he is. He did that for his community as well as just because some bulldog was,
Well, how did you convince Seamus's dad then?
So Seamus's dad's name is Jason.
Jason.
So Caren, I think you were communicating with him by Twitter DMs because we had no other way to reach him. And for weeks and weeks and months, and he answered once and then he went dark, and we were running out of time to make the film. It was now February of 2020, and we were about to hit a pandemic, didn't know it. And he finally said to Caren, look, the issue is if you came to my house with camera equipment and lights and stuff like that, my son will destroy it. He will not handle it well. He'll knock over your equipment. It'll be impossible to do it. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment. We can't do it. And so Caren, I believe you wrote back, okay, how about if we come for a few hours while your son's at school, and we'll be gone by the time he comes back, and you can just tell us your story. And he agreed to that. And so while there are some people in the film who we spent days and days and days and days with, in the case of Jason and Seamus, we spent about 3 hours with him. Oh,
wow.
And at the end of that, he said, my son's coming home from school now. And we said, do you mind if we just stand outside and film you picking him up? He said, no. So that's a case where, we got to know him through his tweets for a long, long time, but then we got to know him more intently and ask him the questions we wanted to ask him. And for a few hours.
He felt more after spending time with us.
Yeah, that's true.
That he felt more comfortable.
Well, you guys are pros at building trust with the people that you're interviewing, and you've been doing that your whole careers. So that's part of why I think this film is so good, because you know how to do that. And obviously you both have a tremendous amount of credibility. I love getting this kind of behind the scenes stuff after watching a documentary and then kind of hearing how you established this. And it's all real stuff, real life, real important. So I appreciate you sharing that all with us. I wanted to ask you, it's the obvious question that anybody interviewing you guys would ask you after the book. And I think George Stephanopoulos, who you guys sat down with, your old colleague at ABC, asked this, but you got to know, you can talk about it in many different ways. What do you hope people get out of viewing this film? Because I took so much away from it, just as I did the book, just as I have every time. I look differently now at human beings, much as those with autism or identify as autistic after reading your book and watching your film. I have like 17 stories to tell you guys since I, read the book as to how I've handled things. What do you hope to achieve, John, with the film?
For people who don't know much about autism or who don't think that they do, to get it, and then by getting it, I mean to recognize that there are people whose brains are wired somewhat differently, some very much so, some less much so, but still impactfully, and that those people are like me, and they're like you in way more ways than they're not like me and not like you. And they're not dislike enough to be counted as other, but to be counted as us, that we're all us. The people on the spectrum and people are not on the spectrum are all part of us. And that means that their differences, no matter how severe, are not such a big deal in the sense of they're not like me and they need to be pushed aside. And I can have a relationship and should have a relationship with them, so that there's really a kind of spontaneous, natural, not forced integration and connection with people who are on the spectrum. And I'm not talking, I might sound kind of preachy about this. I had to learn that myself. I had to learn that the very first time that I met my brother-in-law in Israel. Have I told you this story already? I'm not.
I think so. I mean, I know that about him because you've told him. I don't know if you told me this story, but he's nonverbal, right?
He's nonverbal, and he's really, really very, very challenged. And he could not be left alone to go out on the street. He would not understand traffic. He would step into it, and he could be taken advantage of in a second. And he would not be able to ask for help or understand the answer if he did ask for help. And so the very first time I met him was 25 years ago, maybe 30 years ago, when my wife and I were still going out, and we lived in New York, but we flew back to Israel to meet her family. And her brother comes home from the place where he lives every Friday night for dinner and overnight with his parents. And at this particular event, I think partly because I was visiting, she invited her extended family over, which was about 7 or 8, 9 cousins, and they were all sitting around a big table. So these were cousins who had grown up with her brother since they were small children.
Mm-hmm.
And dinner time came, and I had met her brother briefly. He came in. His mom, who's an amazing advocate for people on the spectrum and started Israel's first autism organization, introduced him to me, kind of prompted him to say shalom to me. He said shalom, didn't look me in the face, but stuck his hand out, very kind of weak handshake, not even looking at me, pulled away immediately, walked away after he said shalom. It didn't feel to me like any kind of interaction I had ever been part of or used to. And then we sat down to dinner, and he was sitting in the middle, and he was making a lot of sounds, and he was kind of grabbing food off of other people's plates and stuff like that. And a seat or two away from him, I was a little thrown by this. Like, what do I do? Do I watch him? Do I not like? But then I noticed within about 2 or 3 minutes that all of the cousins who had known him their entire lives were so natural in their interactions with him that one of his female cousins was sitting next to him, and when he would grab food from somebody's plate, she would just she was having a conversation with somebody across from her, but out of the corner of her eye, she would just pick that food up and put it back, and then she would pick up his fork and put it in his hand, all the while having the other conversation. And every now and then she would pat him on the back, and the cousin on the other side would kind of pat him on the back. And he was just part of the group. And I absorbed that sort of spontaneously. I relaxed into it, and it was a bridge that I had to cross. And I wish it weren't true. I wish I could say I was always evolved, but I wasn't. And I evolved through that, and then I evolved further through having a really, really close friend and colleague who had a son on the spectrum, with this little boy named Mickey, 27 years ago, and watching Caren be a parent to somebody with autism. And then when we started working on the stories, just meeting so many people and such a variety of people, and so many of them like just really impressing me with their guts and their stick-to-itiveness and their persistence and their courage, their resilience, their humor, their friendship, their loyalty, their honesty. So well, I forget what the question was.
Well, what do you want?
I want people to have that evolution that I had.
Well, yeah, and you said so eloquently about these are folks that when you get to know them, they're. I think you said something about they're just like everybody else in that, and we also get to see some of their emotions more honestly. And what I noticed about Mickey is like I felt like I know him by the end of the film. I felt like I wanted to know him more. I felt like I wanted to hang out with him. But the thing that I took from pretty much everybody, and I took this from the book as well, and I'm taking this from my life, is that everybody experiences joy and suffering. And we get to see a lot of those emotions throughout the film with people, the joy and the suffering. What I decided is I want to be a part of the joy more than anything else. And we get to see Mickey experiencing joy, anxiety, all the things that we experience, but that are more honest and naked when you see them on this film, which is why it's such a masterpiece. Caren, same question to you. And maybe, the joy and suffering thing, isn't that a huge part of it? Like there's so much that can be done to create peace, joy, and alleviate suffering for so many folks.
Well, I mean, that's one of the big messages of the film, which is that we want people to walk away knowing that they have a huge role in the kind of lives that people with autism have by just accepting them and for who they are, and to know that it's not so hard to have the back of somebody who's different, because we're all human, really.
There's a scene at the end, I think, it doesn't matter where it is, but Donald's like 90 years old. He's in like a church pew, and he fires a rubber band at a lady. Maybe she's like 60. He's 90, and he's shooting rubber bands at the 60-year-old woman. And she looks and sees that it's him and that he's done this, and she laughs. And that's a beautiful moment, too, because in that moment, if you didn't know Donald, you'd be like, who is this dude shooting me in the church? But because she knows him, it's a hilarious moment. It's hilarious because you know him. And that's what I think folks need to understand. Sometimes people do things for different reasons, and maybe the reaction doesn't have to be being annoyed or being angry or being bothered. It can be one of like, oh my God, that's hilarious that you just did that.
Yeah, you've perfectly captured and made a much shorter answer to the question that I tried to answer with my long diatribe on that one.
Well, I don't have that many words, John, as you know. I like to keep it succinct. Brevity is the soul of wit, I've always thought. But yet your answers and this film, could go on and on, as could the book. I really was disappointed that it was coming to an end, and I want to see more of it. So I think in the end here, I just kind of want to ask you what I should have maybe started with. I realize is probably the best question. When you go do screenings of your new film that everybody's going to watch on PBS on the 13th,
Yep.
Yes.
What do people say to you when you do the Q&A? Like, what are some of the other questions? I mean, Caren, when they meet your son and you're there, like I'm getting the opportunity, which is great. But what do people generally say?
Well, besides that, they want to know. There's a scene in the movie where Mickey's trying to get a girlfriend.
Oh, I wanted to ask this. Yeah.
And they want to know if he gets the girl. I answer that no, but he hasn't given up yet, and he's trying with other girls. So that's a question that we answer usually, or even bring up, because we know people want to know the answer to that. But really,
we've had some powerful moments.
Pretty extraordinary.
Yeah, I was going to say, there was an event we did in Arkansas, in Bentonville, and we were doing some Q&A, and a woman at that event, I was kind of asking questions back to the audience, and I called on a woman who had raised her hand, and she was starting to speak, and then she began to cry, and she said, "I'm sorry, I'm getting so emotional." There were like 300 people in this high school auditorium, beautiful high school auditorium. I'm still amazed by it. I said to her, why don't you take a moment? We can come back to you. She said, no, I don't want to do that. I just want to say, my son was just diagnosed like in the last month, and I'm so scared. I don't have any support. I don't know anybody who can help me. And all around her, the rest of the audience said, yes, you do. We're here. We're here for you. And at the end of that, event, like the organizers went up to her and kind of began hooking her up with like getting into the community and services and things like that. So we saw that happen. Another time we were in an event in Nashville, and there was a guy there was like a little coffee bar at the back of the theater of a projection room in a museum, the Frist Art Museum. And he was serving coffee at the beginning of the event. I took a bathroom break halfway through the movie because I've seen the movie like 8,000 times. So I went to the restroom and I saw that he was standing in the very middle of the back with his arms down his side, very center, like between the two columns of chairs, just watching the movie. And I came back and he was still watching the movie. So 3 days later, we were at another event in Nashville, and I saw him there with his whole family in the front row. And I knew that were his family because everybody else was white. He was the one black man and black family in the family. And afterwards, his wife came up to me and to thank me for the movie. And I said, your husband was at the other event. He was serving coffee there. She said, yes. He watched the movie and he came home and he said, we have to go see this movie. I think I understand what's going on with our son now.
Oh, wow.
And
oh, wow.
I'm getting choked up. There were a lot of people from Vanderbilt University there who have a spectacular autism support program, particularly around employment. And I hooked them up with the Vanderbilt people, and they said, okay, we can bring him in and get him assessed and all of that. So that happened. At another event, you mentioned there's a scene with some bad moment with police. The police chief in this town came to the event, and afterwards there was a lot of Q&A going on. We weren't at this particular one, but we heard about it, and there was a lot of Q&A going on. And we're told that the police chief stood up halfway through and said, look, everybody, we got to discuss what I consider the elephant in the room. There was some bad policing in that movie. What can we do better? What do we need to do?
Oh, wow.
A conversation happened between the parents and that police chief about what to do. And other events like legislators have come, school board members have come, people who make a difference, make the rules, make the decisions, have come to these things.
Right.
But the best thing, I think, was what happened at our very first film festival, which took place in Mississippi. And Donald, being from Mississippi, we were fortunate that he made the 2.5-hour drive to this festival with many members of his community. So that in itself was a lovely event. But after the film, I think maybe the next morning, it was in Oxford, Mississippi, which is home to UMass. We were walking down the street to get lunch, and somebody saw Caren and recognized her from the movie and said, I just want to tell you how much your movie meant to me. I didn't know anything about autism before, but now I feel like I get it, and I want to be part of the solution. I get it.
Yeah.
And that was like, oh, that's the home run moment.
We did it. We felt like, wow, this was not an autism person. This was a film goer.
Yeah, I'm not an autism person, and that's exactly what happened when I read In a Different Key, which I only read because I know and like John Donvan. Like, I would not have read that book. I would not have. I mean, maybe I would have interviewed. Who knows? Because I was, it's the work, but like I wouldn't have necessarily chosen to, because it's just easier to avoid. It's easier to avoid, and I had my life changed, as you know, by the book, and that's why. If you can see, can you see? I don't know my camera. I've got my 10 most impactful books that are always on camera, and this is prominently right at the bottom, and holds literally the rest of the books up, because In a Different Key changed a lot of the way I see the world and people, and the documentary has done even more, because I just love documentaries and I love you guys. Congratulations. This work will live on forever. And I am so excited that everybody's going to get to see it December 13th on PBS.
I just want to say one thing. I know because autistic people are part of us and are everywhere, that there are probably autistic people in the stand-up community. And I know there are parents of autistic people in the stand-up community, because I hear from them. So Tina Winsett, I just want to say thanks for sticking by us all these years waiting for the movie to come out. And I know you've already tweeted about it. I appreciate your support, and everybody else who's going to watch the film.
There are
Tina.
several parents that I've also learned a lot from. And Tina obviously has been there for a long time, with her daughter Brooke and sharing so much. We've met Brooke virtually at least, and yeah, she's amazing. So many other people are, and encourage me obviously to always keep talking about this. And who better to talk about it with than you guys? Caren, congratulations! I'm so excited for you. And what I mean, are you guys doing anything special on the 13th? Is there any watch party? Is there anything that we should know? This group of people listening.
We're going to celebrate for sure. We'll pop some champagne.
Great. Well, I'd love to have you guys, if you want, come by and talk to the wider community live at one of our hangouts, which we do every Thursday night, anytime that you want, because it's always going to be relevant. You've done it. You guys, you did it. Congratulations. I don't know. There are no words to say how grateful the humanity is to the work that you've done on autism and normalizing it for the rest of us. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
As always. Thank you.